Alright, this one's going to be completely different. I'm not really going to be using any of these blades. I got back from work a little bit early because I decided to work through lunch and I'm a little tired and it's really, really warm out. But for this video, I actually wanted to talk about a topic that a lot of people do like to talk about, but I just want to kind of throw my input in with the HEMA community. By no means am I technically correct, but I'm also not technically wrong either, because it is an opinion. But it's the topic of classifications of weapons, more precisely swords. We've all heard the terms short sword, bastard sword, great sword, hand and a half. We've all heard those terms. And those terms are fairly new when it comes to weaponry. In the past, some can argue maybe there was classification, but it wasn't a unified classification. And that really stems to the fact that depending on where you were, really changed the overall genetics. So if someone was taller, one person's longsword might be seen as a hand and a half. If someone was smaller, that hand and a half might be seen as a longsword. Most people go off of the handle, which is a pretty good clarification for the most part, which is where most average people will actually look at to have some simple clarification. This one, like for this, my practice longsword, obviously it is a longsword for me anyways. This is a good width, good height. It is roughly about chest, so for me it's a nice proper longsword. Put it into the hands of someone who's smaller, let's say even 5'5", this blade is already almost the size of them. So, longsword for me, but almost could be considered a great sword for someone small enough, especially if they were just reaching 5 feet. Nowadays, there's not a huge amount of people that are 5 feet, but there is more than enough that you have to acknowledge the fact that what we use for classifications doesn't work for everyone. Now, if it's a properly handmade blade for them, yes, going off of the handle and the length is what you should go off of. Most people don't have the time, resources, or anything like that to have custom-made blades. Custom-made blades can start getting a little bit more on the expensive side. You can also, it takes a lot of time and effort. Even if you have blacksmithing tools, you might not always be financially stable enough to buy the materials, or maybe you have half of the tools you need. Maybe you're not all that skilled. So all those things will come together of custom blades aren't always available. But that's kind of the point of them. Even way back in the day, a custom-made sword to order was more pricey. It took time, because there was specific measurements they had to work with. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just the average person is not going to have a custom-made sword that is perfect for them all the time. For a long sword, I like to go roughly chest height. Could be a little shorter, a little longer. That's what I go with for my measurement of a long sword for me. Hand and a half, I like to be quite about belly button height. That's what I like. This one I am very happy with. This one I would consider a proper hand and a half for me. But again, someone who's shorter with smaller hands might see this as more of a long sword. It is technically classified as a long sword because I ordered it off Cult of Athena and they have it classified as a long sword. But to me, this is more hand and a half because I can use 2 or 1 as I see fit. Because, yeah, I can comfortably have 2 hands on it, but I can also comfortably just have 1. So I classify it as hand and a half. The blade's not really long enough for me to consider it a true longsword for me. But again, someone who's even taller would see this as a one-handed weapon. You put it in the hands of the Mountain, or Thor Hafnor, and yeah, this thing would be ridiculously tiny in his hands. Like, this would be basically the equivalent of my Gladius to him, if not smaller. That man's massive. So that's where the classifications start running into issues. Things like great swords, the only thing that really determines what a great sword is as long as it's as tall as the person or taller. So a long sword, in theory, could be a great sword to some individuals. So some notions where it's like video games have some off representations of weapons sometimes. Like, as much as I love Lords of the Fallen, they're long swords. You swing them like great swords, and a lot of them are the length of a great sword. So you start running into some complications there. Now, there are some of them that are pretty good, but that's video game stuff. They do things to balance stuff out and to just make it look cool or fun to use. In real life, depending on your height, your weight, your size, all of that will make very big differences of what you consider your basic long swords, short swords, great swords, bastard swords. All those classifications will change and alter to each person. That's really all I gotta really say about it. I hope this can open up some form of discussion with some people, which it would be nice to discuss this with some other individuals who might have some experience with it. And everyone has their own viewpoint, so I'm not going to say they're flat out wrong. To some people, I'm flat out wrong. You know, there are very specific things for a blade to be such. And if that's the case, I just like having banter back and forth and just discussing things about that. To me, it doesn't matter what the sword is. It doesn't matter how it is designed. It could be the most over-engineered sword ever created. But just because it looks like a Zweihander, but it fits in your hand and is about this long, just because it looks like a Zweihander, it is not a Zweihander anymore, technically. It is a short sword in the style of a Zweihander. That's where my stance is. That's just my stance. So I'm gonna cut this conversation short here. Again, I hope you guys do enjoy some more of these talks and all that. As much as I love practicing, sometimes it's nice to try to talk with people, try to engage you guys a little bit more with some more of this stuff. And again, I've only been doing HEMA for three-ish years, give or take. So these are the things that I picked up on. Not everyone learns this same way. Not everyone has the same philosophy with stuff. So again, this is just my viewpoints. I hope you enjoyed. And if you have reached this point, because I know this is a long rant, I appreciate it. I really do. And I hope you all have a wonderful end of your days.